I will include follow-up notes, slides from presenters who want to share them, which I think will be most of us, and also some just kind of interesting details, other presentations I think you might find interesting. Of course, information about the various plant sales, because they are the only fundraisers for our program, and they're great plants, so what's not to like? So hopefully all that information will be coming out to you Monday. So this talk, let's just start at the very beginning. It's not you, it's them. Veggies are really hard to grow. We're going to go through a couple of different topics as part of this, but we're going to start with a little bit of plant biology, and we're going to be looking at this kind of through the lens of tomatoes because they're the real heartbreakers. But you can apply this to so many different veggies, right? And it'll just kind of help you understand like why it's hard here. Then we'll talk about what could possibly go wrong. So we'll cover a little bit of abiotic and biotic problems, so disorders and diseases. We'll do a little bit of pests. It's a lot. It will happen. I'll give you some tips on how to manage it, but also some of this is how to manage it, and some of this is just visions from the future, right? And there's only so much we can do about that. And one of the things I loved about Molly's talk, getting us started, is that we run from cool season to warm season here. We can grow all the time. And if a plant is not doing well, these are annuals. And when an annual isn't doing well, you rip it out, okay? And it is probably time to start dreaming and scheming about your new season. So when that tomato starts crossing you, get them out of there. Start dreaming about kale, right? Like there's always something coming down the line. And then finally, a little bit of setting up for success. So what can we do, knowing that it's going to be hard to try and help ourselves out a little bit. So this is a picture that some of you are very familiar with. We all start with grand visions, you know, of our tomatoes out in our beds, and they're beautiful, and it's going to be wonderful, and they're cute, and they're small, and then they grow up, and they look pretty good for about a minute, and then very quickly you get to this, right? You get to wilt, you get to spots on your leaves, you get to something eating it, many things eating it, and it's just really, really hard. And so the question is, like, why is it so hard here? Especially if you have moved from someplace further north. You might hit our climate and be like, why? Why? And part of it just goes really back to the very basics of plant biology. So how do plants make energy? So what they do is they do this amazing thing, right? Photosynthesis, where they're able to use sunlight to actually convert CO2 to sugar, right? So they are, and this is just for the nerds at home, what they're doing is they're actually taking carbon dioxide and water and then using the energy of the sun to create glucose, and those sugars are what they build their entire body out of, right? So we think of all the nutrients that come from the soil, but the vast majority of what you're seeing on a plant is carbon pulled from the air. They're using that to produce everything, and so it's essential that they're able to do photosynthesis. And that seems pretty straightforward. Like, hey, if you've evolved to do photosynthesis, and it's essential, you should probably be able to do photosynthesis. But in our climate, it's really hard. And that's because of how plants actually take in carbon dioxide. So they take in carbon dioxide through these tiny little mouth-like openings on the underside of their leaves called stomata. So it's like two specialized cells that form a little mouth and they can open and close, right? And so the cool thing about that is that they're able to control what's going on. So when the climate is nice and everything's going really, really well, you want to be firing on all cylinders, you take in a lot of CO2. But also, when you have all these openings on the other sides of your leaves, you can lose water through those openings, right? Because it's really an opening into the inner part of your body. And that's really where things, and so these guard cells are regulating this, right? So if it's really nice out, they're going to be taking in carbon dioxide. If it starts getting really, really hot, right, they're going to want to prevent water loss because it's a trade-off. And so all of a sudden, now you're trying to not lose water, but what are you not taking in as well? CO2, right? You can't get carbon dioxide in because you're so worried about losing your water. And so when you are able to, when things are going really, really well, and you're able to take in carbon dioxide and you lose a little bit of water, it's actually really good, right? Because it's like sweating. It's what we do, right? If a little bit of water evaporates off, it can help keep you cool, things are even better, right? Everything is going great with your biology. But if you don't have adequate moisture in the soil, which is where all that water is actually coming from in the plant, everything starts going kind of haywire. right? So it gets hot, the soil dries out, and then all of a sudden, those stomata close, they can't, because they don't want to lose water, and now they can't do photosynthesis, right? By hot, I mean like 80 degrees. What is most of our summer? 100 degrees, right? So that's what's happening on kind of the photosynthesis side. At the same time, they want to be using all of that carbon they're taking from the air to build their bodies, to fuel all of their cellular processes, right? This is respiration. This is when carbohydrates, those sugars are broken down. They're broken down for energy, for defense, growth, reproduction. By reproduction, I mean making tomatoes, right? That's what a tomato actually is. It's a reproductive structure. And this process of respiration, this is like the plant's metabolism. It occurs in all cells. It uses oxygen, and it occurs in the light and the dark, right? Whether it's day or night, a plant has to do basic respiration, has to do basic plant metabolism. So think about these two processes in contrast, right? So photosynthesis and respiration kind of against each other. So photosynthesis makes energy, whereas respiration uses energy. Photosynthesis only occurs during the day because you have to have the sunlight. Respiration occurs all the time. Photosynthesis only happens in cells with chlorophyll, so it's not happening in the roots, it's not happening in those non-green tissues. Respiration is happening everywhere. Photosynthesis is really great, like 65 to 85, so a little bit higher than I said, but 65 to 85. Respiration actually gets faster at higher temperatures. So right at 85, where photosynthesis starts giving out, respiration starts ramping up. Are we seeing the problem? Right? So it's really, really hard. You have these plants that basically can't make the sugar they use to feed their bodies, but their cellular metabolism is going out of control. Okay, like it's going faster and faster. And so the plants start getting exhausted. They just don't have the energy they need to do basically anything, right? And they start really struggling. And one of the things that can be really, really hard here specifically is that we have warm nights. So if you look at our climate compared to the climate in parts of like Oregon, we actually have the same zone in some areas. And Oregon is like this epic, wonderful place full of sod farms and greenhouses and nurseries. And we're not that, right? And the difference is because our zone is based on cold temperatures. They don't take into account things like how hot are your summer nights. And when your summer nights are really, really hot, respiration keeps going quickly. The plants can't photosynthesize. There's never even time for respiration to calm back down or like come back down. There's never any time for anything to balance. Respiration can basically approach the rate of photosynthesis, and so then you have kind of this net zero situation, which is not what you want, right? If every month you're bringing in exactly as much money as you need for like your rent, that's a hard way to go, right? That is hard. So ideally we would want nighttime temperatures to be about 10 to 15 degrees cooler than daytime temperatures. Often here in the middle of summer, our nighttime temperatures are just still boiling, right? They're really warm. And so some plants struggle here simply because they're not adapted to our climate, right? Plants that have evolved in this, great. They can figure out ways to deal with it. They're actually a whole different like ways of doing plant metabolism. There are whole different ways of doing things. A lot of these plants that we're growing are not from this climate, okay? So what happens when things are not balanced, right? You can think of energy, like I said, as almost being like a bank account, right? There's money in, there's money out. So when we think about what plants can do with that energy they're making through photosynthesis, they can spend it. This is going to be things like growth and defense. They can save it, so storing it for future growth. These plants are annuals, so that's not as much of a thing, but if you think about your perennial plants, it's actually very important to them every year that they don't use all their energy, because that energy has to go back to the roots for next year. And they can invest it, right? And that's seeds for future generations. And every time you harvest a fruiting body, right, like so a tomato, pepper, okra, anything like that, that was an investment for the future, right? And you're taking that. So when they don't have enough energy, they can't spend their energy. So there's going to be little to no new growth. This is why you have that problem even during, for example, the Persephone period. They're just not getting enough sunlight. So if they're not getting enough sunlight, they're not producing enough energy, they can't be growing. They have to basically go into dormancy. they're less able to defend themselves. Why are diseases and pests hard here? Because these plants basically have no energy left to defend themselves. And perversely, stressed plants actually attract more pests. And there's research showing that in many cases, pests will reproduce more quickly on stressed plants, right? Because they're like, buffet, you know, and they just go nuts, and they know. They can tell by the stress signals coming off the plant to reproduce even more quickly. These plants also cannot invest. And so it's both kind of like short-term and long-term. So in the short term, they just don't have the energy for it. And what happens that's really, really frustrating here is that oftentimes actually fruits and seeds abort, right? So sometimes the temperature is just too high for them to develop properly, but sometimes the plant also gets the signal like, it's too hot, I don't have the energy for this, don't make seeds, right? So what'll happen is, this is an example of a tomato flower that the nighttime, or the temperatures got too hot, often just above 95 degrees for even a couple of hours, and all the flowers start aborting, right? So like, you've probably seen this on your tomato plants in August, where you go out and the tomato is still there, it's like doing fine, the plant, but you're getting no fruit. And that's because if you watched closely, the flowers actually will open and then close and turn yellow and fall off. And it's because they're literally just failing from the temperature. Even if that tomato could start producing, like it could start producing a fruit, there's a lot of times where they have trouble fully ripening fruits at high temperatures, like they just don't have the energy for it. And so either biologically it doesn't happen, or the plant kind of makes a decision to abort, right? Because it's like, I don't have energy for this, I'm gonna kill myself if I try to make this tomato. So, kind of for reference, I love the tomato for this because I think it's so helpful. So this is the close relative that we think is kind of like the ancestor of the tomato, right? It is a long, spindly vine. It's got fruit the size of a pea, very, very small little fruit. It grows basically in the Andes, which that's not our climate, right? We do not have like organic mountain soils with like nice, cool nights. And what we've done to the tomato is we've turned it into this, right? Like a million different things. And if you have to imagine, right, like the really hard part about this is if you're trying to grow a tomato that big, like a slicer, where does that energy come from, right? The plant only has so much energy. So the energy gets taken from things like defense. It gets taken from things like growth, right? Because the plant only has so much energy, it has to make these trade-offs, right? Where now we're putting all that sugar, all that stuff into some beautiful fruit that the gardener's just gonna take and like make a sandwich out of, which is good for us. But the plant's like, good God, right? Because all it actually needed to do was it needed to make just enough tomato around a seed that like a bird would take it, right? They were not trying to make a tomato sandwich. So just keep in mind that like we're asking these plants to perform in a really, really high level way. We're asking them to do all this in a climate they're not evolved for, right? There is, as much as we love to think that like the vegetable garden is this like beautiful natural thing, there's nothing natural about it. And we're just really trying to kind of get these plants to fire on all cylinders. So there are ways to do that, but also just give yourself some grace. This is a hard thing to do. Tomatoes are, and so many other veggies, we can grow them here, but there are some tips we can do, and there are some kind of common problems you're going to run into along the way. Let's talk about it. This will all happen to you. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, give it time. Give it time. This just means you're trying. So first we're going to start with diseases and disorders. And so what I mean by that, what's the difference? A disease is biotic. It has like a biological root. So there's a pathogen or there's something that causes it. A disorder is just the plant's growing funny, right? And it might be because the nutrients aren't right in the soil or something's going wrong with temperature, right? But there's no like biological element that you could ideally kill, right? It's just something going on with the plant. And it can be really helpful to kind of separate these two in your mind because you're going to approach them really differently. Right? There's no benefit to trying to use something to kill a fungus on a disorder. Because it's not a fungus. Like, we just know it's not a fungus. It's something that doesn't have a biological aspect. So abiotic disorders, they often appear very, very suddenly, very, very quickly, whereas a biotic disease appears gradually. So that's like you have little spots one day, and then the spots are a little bit bigger a week later, and then they're a little bit bigger 2 weeks later. That's a disease. The plant just like collapses suddenly one day. That was probably something that went wrong with watering, or something went wrong with, it was a disorder. Or you weren't watching that closely. Also, spoiler alert for a lot of us gardeners, things that collapse suddenly and we never saw coming. I'm like, you've been busy. There's a lot going on at work. It's fine. Abiotic disorder tends to affect many species. So if I look at my veggie bed and my tomatoes are struggling, but so are my beans, and so is something else, and they're all kind of failing at the exact same time for the exact same reason, or like for the exact same whatever, that's not a disease, because they're not diseases that jump from tomatoes to beans to lettuce, right? That's probably a water issue or some sort of contaminant, if I'm being totally honest. Biotic diseases tend to just affect related species, and so one of the things to keep in mind is that for a lot of our summer crops, they're all closely related. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and tobacco, if that's what you're into, are all in the Solanaceae. They're all closely related. And for our winter crops, they're not even just like closely related, they're all just one species for the most part. We'll have a slide on it later, but so many of our winter crops are one species that we've just kind of like done the dog treatment on, where we took a wolf and turned it into a chihuahua and like a Weimaraner. And that's kind of what we did with a lot of our winter crops. You'll see that. Abiotic disorders don't tend to spread. So whatever was the thing that killed the plants, it happened, and it happened. Whereas biotic diseases will spread. Abiotic disorders, this is the mark of humans. Whenever you see a geometric or a linear pattern, if something happened in a perfect line or at a perfect right angle, a human somehow did that, right? Like, I don't know how, but like a human did that. Whereas biotic diseases are random or hot spot patterns, right? Like they look organic. And finally, with disorders, there's a distinct separation between healthy and non-healthy, right? So like, there is a perfectly dead plant here and a perfectly live plant here. Or there is, these leaves are all dead and these are all healthy and green. Whereas with the disease, oftentimes there's like a little dark spot in the middle and a yellow halo around the spot and then the green around it, right? There's these transition zones, and that's actually the disease moving in different directions. Oftentimes, unless you're really confident that it's a disease, it's a disorder, and oftentimes it's human error. That's something that we all just learn. A lot of times it's like you thought there was enough water. Perversely, sometimes it's also you thought like you were over watering, right? We can kind of go in both directions, and they often have similar symptoms. But so if you do think you have a disease, I'm going to talk through a little bit about that. But let's look first at some of the environmental kind of abiotic stuff you'll run into. And this is especially with tomatoes, but you'll see this on other crops as well. So with tomatoes, one of the most common ones we get, and this is really interesting, is it's just leaf curl. There are certain varieties of tomatoes where the leaves curl. It's not a problem. There's nothing you can do about it. You just look at certain varieties and they look funny. That's just what they're into, right? Like, and there's no real problem, but if you looked at that plant, you'd be like, ooh, gross. We also see blossom end rot. This is a very common one, especially early in the season. This is a symptom of of not consistent watering. People will tell you it's a calcium deficiency. That's only because calcium is mobile in water. So if the water is not consistent, the calcium cannot move consistently. So don't add gypsum salt, just water more regularly. It's not uncommon to get blossom end rot on some of your first tomatoes of the season either way, but the plants will normally kind of mature out of that. Blossom drop, you'll see this on tomatoes, on peppers, on any number of different species. This is a temperature thing, right? It's just too hot. Cat facing, tomatoes just do this. Certain varieties, bigger varieties, are known to cat face. You can cut it out. It's like ugly, but you can eat around it. It's fine. It's still tasty. It's just ugly. And then finally, fruit cracking. This will happen on any number of different varieties and species. What's going on with this typically is that you got a lot of water as the plant was kind of getting toward the end of being ripe. So for example, if I go out and I look at my tomatoes and I have a bunch of tomatoes that are starting to ripen but not fully ripe, and I know I'm getting a heavy rain in a couple days, I'll just harvest all of those and let them ripen on the counter. Because when all that rain hits, the plant absorbs all that water, swells the fruit, and just cracks it open. So when we're thinking about disease, it's really, really helpful to think about like what actually causes disease. How does that happen? Okay? And so disease is a combination of 3 different factors. We call this disease triangle. Sometimes you might also hear it referred to as the disease pyramid because all of this takes time. You have to have a susceptible host. So for, like, you could use me as an example getting a cold, right? So when I'm run down and I'm tired and I'm not doing as hot and like my defenses are down, right, I'm a more susceptible host. I can be as run down as imaginable, but if I never run into a cold virus, I'm not going to get a cold, right? The pathogen has to be present, and then a conducive environment, right? And that is kind of like me and the cold virus are hanging out for a little bit too long. Things are not going well, I'm tired, I create that conducive environment. And so only when all 3 of these things happen together, we have a susceptible host, a pathogen, and a conducive environment can it happen, right? So if a tomato disease lands on a zinnia, you cannot get disease. If a tomato disease lands on a tomato that was bred to be resistant to that disease, you can't get disease, right? So you have to have all of these 3 things together, and knowing that helps you figure out kind of how to target that, and I'll give you some examples. And when we think about like what could be those diseases, what could be those pathogens, normally when I give this talk, this is the whole section of the talk, and we go through a whole bunch of diseases, but I'm going to give you the take home, okay? There are 3 different types of disease. There's fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, and viral diseases. And if you want to get into it, we can diagnose a lot of these. But if you are a novice gardener, fungal diseases could look like leaf symptoms. They could look like wilt. Bacterial diseases could look like wilt or like leaf symptoms. And viral diseases can look like curling or leaf spots, right? And we can diagnose this, right? We have a whole plant disease and insect clinic in NC State. We can figure it out. It's fine. But for you, as a home gardener, it's going to be really hard to parse that out. And if you're staring at a dead tomato and you're like, don't worry, I figured it out, it's bacterial spot, what does that get you, right? The tomato's dead. So most things are fungal. Just by the nature of disease, like 60, 70, 80% of diseases are fungal, so you probably have a fungal disease. But in all of these cases, especially for fungal and bacterial diseases, what they like is hot, humid environments, sometimes cool, humid environments, always humid. If there's moisture, they like it. If it's hot and humid, they really like it. Some of them are weirdos and like cold and humid. But in general, it's a problem of you don't have enough airflow, you have a lot of moisture around, you just live in our climate, probably the #1 cause. And so there are things we can do about that. But that's where it really, really helps to understand this disease triangle, right? So to understand which part of this triangle can I try and intercept? Because I have to have all 3 to get disease forming, right? So if I want to take out the conducive environment, how do I do that? Don't water your leaves. Always water the base of the plant. I know it feels nice, like you're doing something refreshing for them on a hot day, but just water the base of the plant. Rain is okay, but like when we have long rainy periods, also know that you might see more problems cropping up. Removed diseased plants and debris. Don't let that sickly plant hang out in your garden. Rip them out. Rip them out. Okay? Just do it. Just like, I know it's hard, but do it. Because the thing is, that plant is now shedding spores and bacteria and everything else back into the soil. Okay? So rip it out. Increase airflow. So someone asked about pruning tomatoes. One of the real reasons we like to prune tomatoes and prune out suckers, but prune basically anything, is just to get airflow. Get air moving through the plants, drying out those leaves, doing all that kind of stuff. Like, as successful as you feel as a gardener when you look at your veggie garden and it's like a thicket, I mean, you feel great. It's a secret garden situation. But you need airflow. So prune it so that you can see movement through those plants. Mulching is extremely helpful. You can mulch with any number of different things. I'll have a slide on this in the future. but mulching adds organic matter to the soil, and it helps keep disease pressure down because most of our diseases are coming from the soil. If you want to remove the susceptible host, crop rotation is extremely useful. There are kind of a couple different ways to do that. If you have a lot of space, you could actually rotate your crops around through those spaces. That's ideal. If you don't have that, I would just recommend not having like, this is my raised bed I plant tomatoes in. I only plant tomatoes in it, and I plant tomatoes in it every year, right? Instead, if I had 2 raised beds, I would plant maybe 1 or 2 tomatoes in a bed, 1 or 2 tomatoes in the other bed, plant a bunch of other like beans around them, something that's not the same species, like not the same family, right? I would mix everything in really tightly, because that at least allows the diversity in that bed so that you're not just laying out a buffet of one species for its pathogen, right? Because the diseases that hit tomatoes really hit tomatoes. And so if there's some beans in there and some lettuce in there and some okra in there and some other stuff in there, it's not quite as dense for them, and so they're not going to raise to the same level. Like, you want diversity, right? As much diversity as possible. And then planting resistant species. Okay. I love it. I love a tomato. I love a pepper. I love all these kind of things. But we can get really hung up on heirlooms. Guys, they're going to break your heart, okay? Like, they're going to break your heart. And the old logic is like, well, you buy heirlooms because they're just tastier. Yeah, they used to be, but also, it doesn't matter how tasty it is. Like, this is what I always say. It doesn't matter how tasty it was supposed to be if it died. Okay? It doesn't work that way. And there's so many good varieties coming out from the research universities and from different companies every year that are tastier, they're prettier, they're doing better, they're wonderful, and they have disease resistance in them. Okay, so as much as you love your Cherokee Purple or whatever it is, just try some of the new varieties. Have fun with the seed catalog. Buy something that is an alphabet soup of disease resistance. And you know what? If nothing else, you'll at least actually have a tomato to eat. All right, and it'll be great if you have it. Planting smaller fruited varieties, not only is this good for low sun gardens, but just in general, smaller peppers, smaller tomatoes, all of these things, they take less time to mature, and so they don't have as much time to get hit by pests and diseases, right? They're far more successful here. Like a bell pepper or a slicer tomato is like a varsity level sport in our climate, and just know if you're ready for that. And I'm sorry that your plant's dead. Okay. And then finally for pathogen, one of our most effective sprays, and it is organic, is copper. Copper is very effective on both fungus and bacteria. And what I really like to do with it is I like to apply it at planting, especially for our warm season crops. That's really where copper shines. And what you're doing with copper is you can do the roots. I know some people really, really like that. What I really like is spraying the undersides of the leaves. And then as those plants grow up, I prune all those lower leaves out until I have about 12 inches of space between the lowest leaf and the soil. And that's because most of our diseases come from the soil. They're splashed up by rainwater. And so copper is a good barrier. It doesn't allow things to grow when you don't have space, but when I have space, I'd rather do it that way. Yeah.
Is copper mostly tomato focused still, or are there other things that we could spray on? Nightshades in general?
Yeah, nightshades in general. And I mean, I would just like, if you feel like you've had historically problems with something, like, read the label, but like, you know. Copper.
Okay.
Okay, so that's some of our disease stuff. We'll move into some of the pests you might run into. There are 2 kind of major groups that can cause us heartache. The first ones are the ones with chewing mouth parts. These are so frustrating because you're going to see a lot of chewing. You're going to see it everywhere, all the time, for everything. It could be beetles or butterflies and moths, so the caterpillars. Could be beetles, both caterpillars or both adults and grubs. Grasshoppers, sawfly, slugs and snails, any number of different things you can see chewing damage. The reason it's important to distinguish some of this is because how you treat it depends on what's causing the problem, right? And so we get a lot of this sort of damage on tomatoes from things like tomato hornworm. We get a lot of this sort of damage on all of our brassicas. And we get kind of this across the board. And so this is where I wanted to talk about brassicas, right? Because most of the pest damage you're going to see on brassicas, so those cool season vegetables, is from one culprit. And the reason for that is because, like I said, these are all one species, Brassica oleracea, right? So this is your wolf at the top. and underneath, that's, right, Chihuahua to Great Dane. So if you take just this one species and you separate it out for, you just want a lot of leaves all in one spot, you get a cabbage. If you want flowers but they don't open, you get broccoli. If you want flowers but in a weird rosette and white, you get cauliflower, right? These are all the exact same species, and they all get hit by the exact same pest, right, which is cabbage looper. So, you know, in your fall garden, kind of late summer fall garden, and you start seeing the little white butterflies around, you're like, oh, so pretty. It's like nature out here.
Oh, no.
It's a bloodbath, okay? So what they're doing is they're hitting those young plants, and especially when they're a little bit stressed, because they're cool season crops, and they're planted when it's a little bit too warm out, and then the cabbage loopers start flying, and they can just decimate them. And so luckily, one of the really, really effective controls for this is also organic. It's BT. I'll show these slides, don't worry. So you can see that. Bacillus thuringiensis is a soil bacteria that I think they actually discovered. It was like the 1920s, 1930s, and it basically hits a caterpillar's stomach by being eaten and like explodes its little stomach, right? Which sounds vicious, but they were trying to kill your plants. And so one of the reasons, and so you'll see it sold under trade names like dipple dust, thuricide, a couple of different things. One of the things I really like about it is that it loses its efficacy really quickly, so it doesn't work really quickly. Like after water, almost anything like even looks at dipple dust, and dipple dust stops working. And that's what I want from a pesticide. I want a pesticide that fails quickly, because I do not want it hanging out in my soil and hanging out on my plants and just staying active, right? Like I would rather have to reapply after every rain or every 7 to 10 days than Lord knows what's happening, right, with that chemical in the environment. And that's really, really cool. The other thing I will say though about BT, and BT is really effective also if you think you have caterpillar damage on your warm season veggies, it works on everything. Here's the thing, BT kills caterpillars. These are caterpillars. It kills all caterpillars. So if you have parsley for swallowtails, because it's easier to buy parsley than swallowtails, so like it's actually better to have the swallowtails, don't put BT on it, right? Or if you're doing kind of an integrated approach where you're foodscaping, be very, very careful by using some of these products, because you don't want to be attracting in pollinators and accidentally hitting them with BT, right? Because BT doesn't care. It's just going to kill a caterpillar. I tend to have a very hands-off approach with most of my garden, like whatever, I'm here for the pollinators, but in my veggies I tend to be ruthless, because like that's my space, right? I gave all the rest of it to them. This is my space for me, but I have a clean line on where these products stop.
When you say you have a clean line, like what spatial separation does that actually, what does that actually mean?
Sure, like so I grow in raised beds, and I will apply a product in the raised bed, and it will not go out of that, and that's enough, because BT, the way it works is like that caterpillar has to eat that BT. Right, so it's not something that's got overspray or it's got drift, and I know if it gets wet, if anything happens to it, it becomes ineffective. So I tend to be like, the lines of my raised bed or the lines of my container are where the products stop. The other major thing you can run into with veggies are insects with piercing sucking mouth parts. So this will be things like true bugs, aphids, whiteflies. So by true bugs, like this is one we get a lot of, the leaf-footed bug. They can cause this sort of stippling damage on your tomatoes. Fun fact, the Master Gardeners have a blog. And like 10 years ago, we wrote an article on leaf-footed bugs. And it is to this day our most found article every year. Thousands more views than any other article. And we are so amused by that. We write a lot of good stuff, but that's the one people love. And so these guys can be kind of annoying, but one of the good things about them is that most of the bugs in this group start out as just smaller versions of themselves. They go through what we call incomplete metamorphosis. And those smaller versions are often a little bit soft-bodied, a little juicy, a little targetable with chemicals, right, which is great. So you can use things like diatomaceous earth or insecticidal soap. Some of these really kind of low stakes, again, organic options, and they knock them out really well. So if we're putting this all together, what can we do for pest management? First off, space plants for better airflow. Better airflow is going to help everything. It helps the plants stay healthier, stronger, better defend themselves. Avoid overhead watering. This will help keep your disease pressure low. Scout regularly to find problems before they become established. Every plant that just suddenly died of a disease has had that disease for weeks, if not months, right? And if you could get in there and prune out some of those infected leaves, I'm not saying that you can stop it, but you can slow it down. And if you're going to use organic controls for some of your pests, there are a number of good ones. I really like insecticidal soap. Neem oil is very similar in a lot of ways. Diatomaceous earth is a powder. It's similar to BT, which is also a powder, and it's great because it, again, becomes ineffective when it gets wet, anything like that. For me, in my kit, I would feel completely comfortable if all I had was copper, insecticidal soap, and BT. Like, I can kind of do everything with that. Oh, and like ruthlessness. Just being willing to rip stuff out. Okay, so we've talked about why it's hard. We've talked about what can go wrong. Don't worry, there are things we can do so that it's still fun. We still get all the good veggies. So what do we do first? We care for our soil. Our soil is what cares for our plants. We say we're growing veggies, we're growing soil, everything we can do to make our soil better. There's a reason we started with that class for this series, right? So add organic matter. We have clay soils, you want more organic matter. Organic matter improves your soil structure and it feeds soil biology, right? It makes all the critters in the soil that are gonna fight off the critters you don't want stronger, happier, and healthier. Everything you can do to have living roots in your soil at all times is great. Living roots give off sugars and other structures that actually also feed the soil biology. And so what does that mean? That means that, like, heresy, I'm not much of a cool season gardener. Like, tomatoes have my heart, and I'm kind of here for tomatoes. So every winter, I make sure I plant my beds in clover, because I want to keep my soil covered. It adds a little nitrogen, but it protects the soil and feeds the soil. If you're, for some reason, not a warm season gardener, I don't really understand, but I love that for you. You could cover crop in a warm season thing, right? We have options for all of that. I can share some resources, but just keeping your soil covered as much as possible. And when you harvest your plants and when you take them out at the end of the season, unless that plant died because of disease, you can always just cut it off at the ground and let the roots decompose back into the soil. It's really good. Mulch. Mulch can be any number of different things, right? If you add a thick enough layer of compost to the top, that serves as a mulch. You can mulch with green grass clippings. If you're going to do that, be honest with yourself. You don't want to mulch with grass clippings if you have a heavy chemical treatments on your yard, or if you have a Durham yard that's actually weeds, right? You just cut off the seed heads. So, like, I do not mulch with grass clippings, but one could. So this is really great because it decreases your water needs, and also, again, like we said, right, so many of those diseases really come from the soil. And mulching protects the soil and also makes it so that water drops don't come up and hit the bottoms of the leaves. And it's really like all the diseases you've ever heard that you don't know how to pronounce are soil-borne diseases, right? These are all soil-borne diseases. Pythium, Fusarium, Rhizoctonia, everything that, like, if someone's like, oh, you got a bunch of letters in a row, that came from the soil. And you already have it in your soil, right? These things live in the soil. They are just there. And so mulch helps keep that separate from the leaves, right? Because a lot of times the roots are defended against these diseases. Like, they know. Roots know to defend themselves. Leaves don't know to defend themselves from soil-borne diseases.
Can I ask a question about mulch?
Yeah.
'Cause I would say that's one thing I've never done, mainly because I've heard so many bad things about the mulch that you get, that it has disease in it, and then it makes it worse.
Sometimes it has fungus in it. So
Fungus,
the question
yeah.
is about, like, horror stories about mulch and it having disease in it. Sometimes mulch has fungus in it, that's for sure. But, like, that's just biology, and it's not the same fungus. That's a fungus that lives on decomposing wood.
Yeah.
It's not a fungus that's going to hit your plants. Another thing is if you don't want to mulch, one of the things I really like to do is I grow, and this doesn't work every year because if it gets too hot, it's hard, but I actually grow nasturtiums under all my plants. And that's because they create kind of a green layer. They're pretty and they're edible, both the leaves and the flowers, and I find something like weirdly delightful about the idea of eating a flower. A, because it's awesome. B, because it thinks it's still alive, because you can just stand there in the garden and do it. It's like my own weird sadism. But, so you can grow all sorts of low things as well, and that can serve as your mulch layer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
There's so many cool varieties of nasturtiums too. They'll struggle in the heat, but
Can you repeat the name of that?
nasturtiums,
Yes.
Nasturtium. I'll send it in an email. But there's so many cool. There's clumping varieties. There's trailing varieties. There's different colors. There's the Alaska mix, which is variegated. And a lot of people like to start them from seed inside, but I literally just like buy 2 or 3 bags of seed every year, packets of seed, and like with my thumb throw a seed in, cover it up, and move on with my life. And as long as I overplant, I have a friend who comes over and is always like, "Oh, your nasturtium farm is going," and I'm like, "Yep." So, yeah.
One thing I did not anticipate with your raised beds is ant infections.
Yeah.
Have you had that happen at all? And
Fire ants or regular ants?
I've had both. Yeah.
Okay. Regular ants, I get some action, but as long as whatever, it's fine. Like, I don't mind them too much. I like to tell myself they're aerating the soil, which is actually just like, they're here, and what are you going to do about it? Fire ants, keeping the soil covered, mulching, or adding like a living layer will help that, because fire ants like exposed, dry soil.
Okay.
If you have fire ants, there are a couple of organic control options for them.
Yeah.
They're not terribly effective, and you will have to reapply multiple times, but they are organic, and like we use them at our community garden at Briggs.
Okay.
And so the main organic control active ingredient is something called spinosad.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
But
a like bag of like, get your fire ants.
Yeah, come and get it is what it's called. Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving just so we stay on time. But, so okay, you've got your soil, you've taken care of your soil. A lot of times if you're growing natives and that kind of stuff, you actually don't need to fertilize much. Like, they don't care, they want lean soil. They're like, I grew up like this, right? Like, they're fine. Veggies, again, remember, we're asking them to overperform on every level, so oftentimes we do want to fertilize. The best thing you can do for your plants is to have good, healthy soil with a lot of organic matter. That will actually take care of a lot of this for you, and especially for a home gardener who, like, you don't notice the difference between good yield and great yield because you're not taking it to market. Do some of this, but you don't have to go nuts. This is something that matters a lot more when you're really trying to push the plants. So the major nutrients that plants are going to want around here are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are some of the essential plant nutrients. I cover this more in depth in the soils talk if you ever want to review that. And when you look at a bag of fertilizer or even a potting soil that has nutrients in it, you will see 3 numbers in a row, and you will always see them in the same order, right? NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It is always that way. It has to be labeled that way, and it has to be in that order on every bag that contains a nutrient. And those numbers are percentages. So for a bag like this, it's 32% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, 10% potassium, okay? And so, why does that matter? Well, it's about what these things do for our plants. So nitrogen really promotes green leafy growth. So this is really, really important, especially as plants are getting started, or if you're growing cool season veggies that just are green leafy growth, right? This is something you want to be giving early, can be really helpful. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go and buy kind of a veggie fertilizer, and if you read the label, the instructions on the bag, it'll be like throw a handful in. I mean, they give a real measure. But I say throw a handful in when you get started in the bottom of the hole, and then you throw a handful in on a schedule that it says on the bag, and that will be more than enough. If you were to ever not have enough nitrogen, which I think is unlikely, but it's possible, you might see things like yellowing that starts on the lower leaves. Be careful about that. There's a lot of diseases that are yellowing that starts on the lower leaves. So just because you see that, it doesn't always mean a nutrient deficiency. The thing you can run into, though, with nitrogen that you have to be careful about is it's good to give some, it's not better to give more. Because especially with tomatoes, what can happen is if they get too much nitrogen, they're like, okay, great, green leafy growth. And they just go hard on green leafy growth. And you're like, no, I wanted you to make tomatoes. And they're like, green leafy growth, got it. So you'll get these bushy, bushy, bushy plants that almost don't produce flowers. Okay, so again, when I tell you something is good, it doesn't mean more is better. It means like do what the bag tells you. Phosphorus is really, really good for root, flower, seed, fruit development, kind of all of those things. So kind of it's like the complement to nitrogen when you think about it. Phosphorus, because of our soils and because of the way that they work, can often, you have to be careful with phosphorus, and you don't want to apply it only if a soil test tells you that you need it. And you might need it. You really might need it in our soils. But if you've been adding a lot of compost to your soil, especially any sort of composted animal product, but compost in general, you probably actually have a lot of phosphorus in your soil, and I wouldn't add too much more. Because phosphorus binds to soil particles, and if we get heavy rains and any of that soil washes off, it takes the phosphorus with it. And when that happens on a whole bunch of gardens all across Durham, it hits our waterways and causes like algal blooms and other kind of water quality issues. So you don't want to just like go hard on phosphorus unless the soil test tells you. And then potassium is great because it's really an overall plant health, growth, immune nutrient, right? So this just helps the plant generally stay healthy, have a good immune system. It does leach at a moderate rate, so phosphorus binds to the soil particle and stays exactly where it is. Potassium doesn't, it moves through the soil, so you'll have to reapply it periodically because water carries it through. And it doesn't get into the water, it's not a problem like that, but it's good to know. And so for all of these things, it can be really, really helpful just to do a soil test. More so than anything else, the soil test is going to tell you what's going on here. And the really, really helpful thing that the soil test will also tell you is your pH. Molly mentioned, right, so for veggies, our native pH in our soil is like 4.5 to 5. It's pretty low. Veggies want like 6 to 7, maybe 6.5 or higher. And the reason for that is not just because like they've decided they're really into pH. It's because pH actually affects nutrient availability. So let me talk you through this really quickly. What this figure is on the bottom, you're going to see pHs, and then you have these bars. And these bars are all different essential plant nutrients. And where a bar is thin and red, it means that at that pH, the plant cannot access that nutrient. And where a bar is thick and green, it means at that pH, a plant on average can access that nutrient. And so if my pH is down around 4.5, for example, let's look at phosphorus, right, this second bar. It doesn't really matter how much phosphorus I put, the plant can't access it. It's like it can't see it because the pH is too low. And so instead, what we really, really like to do is we like to try and bring our pH up for our veggies, so we add lime, and then all of a sudden, we're in the green or yellow section for all these bars, right? Like our nutrients are probably good to go. And so if I could only do one thing, if I could only add fertilizer or add lime, so raise the pH, anyone guess what I would do? Yeah, I'd add lime. I'd raise the pH because all those nutrients that were there already are accessible now, right? And that's really, really helpful. So how do you know? How do you know how to do that? I'll include information that's in our follow-up email. You do a soil test, right? We have supplies for all of this at our office, at the Cooperative Extension office. We have an outdoor cabinet where you can just like pick up supplies and drop off tests after April 1st, and it's great. And we take it over to the soil lab for you, and it's free until Thanksgiving. Or you can come into our office during business hours, which is 8:35, and like we will talk you through it, right? So if you are the kind of person who's like, whatever, I'll just read the form, it's fine. Go to the cabinet. If you want someone to talk all this through with you, we would love to do that. That's like literally our job. And when you get that soil test back, and you think like, that was a really useful exercise, and I don't know what this means, that's also our job, right? I would love to talk to you about interpreting your soil test. They will tell you, based on what you want to grow and your soil, how much lime to add to get it to the right pH, and what nutrients to add based on what you want to grow. Okay, and this is all done by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, your tax dollars at work. If you do end up needing to add fertilizer, there are a couple of different types, and just to kind of make you aware of this, there are slow release fertilizers. This is going to be things that are oftentimes your organic options, so things like feather meal, bone meal, blood meal. You'll realize the more you get into gardening that most of your really best fertilizers are just blood offerings to the soil, right? Which is awesome. These are great because they feed the soil in kind of a long-term way, and they're really, really effective. I think of this as like a big hearty meal. This is in contrast to some of your soluble fertilizers. Often these are granules, they dissolve really quickly in water. Things like your standard 10-10-10 that's not organic is typically in this camp. I think of that as like a snack, you know? Like they last for a while, but the slow release fertilizers feed the soil a lot longer. And then finally you have your liquid fertilizers. These are really only a quick boost, right? It's like a candy bar, right? It's fast, get in, get out. This is something that I don't tend to use a lot of in the garden. This is something more like what I would use if I was doing seed starting and I really wanted to dial in exactly how much nutrients I was giving something. So in general, in your garden, you're going to be looking for something more in that top category of a slow release fertilizer.
Should you still soil test with a slow release fertilizer, like the blood offering option?
Yes, yeah, because it'll tell you your pH,
Right.
right? Because you might be like doing all the very best blood offerings, but your pH is wrong.
Okay.
And so the plant's like, I don't see this.
Okay.
Yeah. Soil testing is a really great thing to do your first year and then to do kind of every couple of years after, just to like get this snapshot of your garden. And it's free April through Thanksgiving, so like why not?
Okay, for compost, I have like 8 different beds/containers in my
Yeah.
yard, and I bought soil from Sands and Soil last year. Do I need to get soil tested this year? I had not done it before.
If you know what product you bought from them,
Yeah.
they can probably give you a SDS sheet for it, which will include all that information. I would suggest doing it just to go through the exercise, but if you're like busy or just don't want to,
Yeah, I just.
reach out to them and be like, what are the specs on the soil?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they can have all that. All right, I'm gonna keep rolling a little bit, and I will have time for questions at the end. Common solutions. I have beagles, so in general, if I can include a hound, I'm like, sure, let's do that. So take time to understand the situation, so doing your soil testing. Increasing airflow, very, very important, right? Anything you can do to get that humidity down is really, really helpful. So pruning, not watering the leaves. In addition to pruning for airflow, pruning out dead, damaged, or diseased tissue. At the point where you're looking at a plant and you're like, ooh, if I take out all of that, I don't know if it's going to grow. What's the actual answer? Rip it out, right? That's your answer. And then planting small fruited varieties and resistant varieties, right? Taking advantage of some of the amazing research that's happened and getting those resistant varieties. These are often going to be, they're going to be marketed as hybrids. They're going to tell you their disease resistance right on the packet. And if you got to do your heirlooms, stick with smaller fruited varieties. The less time fruit has to spend ripening on the plant, the less time it has to get attacked, right? If we think about that in more of a calendar view, what to do when. So early in the season, which is where we are now and where we're heading into for worm season, plant resistant varieties, mulch after you plant, right? Put something down to protect the leaves from the soil. Limb the plants up as they grow up, right? So like you should never put tomato, pepper, any of those things in the ground and have the leaves touching the soil. Even though you can plant them deep, like with tomatoes, you plant them and then you still prune leaves so they're not grazing the soil, right? You want to keep them up a little bit. And sometimes your plants will look a little goofy for a while because they'll just be like a couple leaves at the top, but they'll grow out of it. Copper on the undersides of leaves until you can get them limbed up about 12 inches. Mid-season, you're going to be monitoring. Enjoy your garden. Get out in your garden. Look at your garden. Look at the undersides of leaves. Look at all of it, right? Like really get to know what your plants should look like. Sanitation, so cleaning out dead, damaged, diseased. Airflow, hand-picking insects if you're into it. Catherine is one of our master gardeners who's always amused by the fact that I can't kill insects by hand. I originally went to grad school for entomology instead of plants, and I'm just a little tender-hearted about it. I can spray them like it's my job, but like the idea of just squishing things seems brutal. But if you can do that, do it, because I'm jealous. Yeah.
I have the same problem, so I started knocking them into bowls of soapy water.
Yes!
And it works really well.
I
Just
know,
anybody
like
else
it's
doesn't
not
like
me, it's
squishy
the
bugs.
soapy water.
I just push it in there.
It's not, yeah, you fell. So if you're going to do some of those organic options, right, copper, BT, right, that's that dibble dust we talked about, diatomaceous earth, insecticidal soap, whatever product you're using, like be honest with yourself, it is a pesticide, okay, because you're using it to kill a pest. So read that label, follow the label, it will give you the best instructions on how to use it properly, but these are things that like are very, very low impact, and I would feel completely comfortable using in my garden. And then ongoing crop rotation, so as much as you can, maybe not growing all tomatoes all the time, every time, right? Rotating out, having a cool season and a warm season garden, and being ruthless, right? It's my number one tip I can give you, be ruthless. There is always the next season's garden coming. Free up some space, right? So with that, I have a couple of, maybe time for a couple questions, and I will be by, but I'd like us to also be able to take a short break.
I went to a talk that Craig Triboulier, the tomato man, did. He said, look, don't be so hard on yourself. He said, I have two solutions. Grow your tomatoes in pots, or you can go to the store.
Right. Support your local farmer. You guys, like, this is the, like, get to the farmer's market. At the time where it fails, go to the farmer's market. It looks great. It's fun. You run into a friend. You get a baked good, right? And have a good time.
So, question for you.
Yeah.
I've had people suggest when your tomato plants look like they're not ready to continue, that if you take them all to the top and they produce more, and they have, is that the airflow then that's causing them one?
Yeah.
Or they all the roots to the top? Just
Airflow can really help. And the other thing with tomatoes in our climate is because August is so unbearably hot, oftentimes what we're doing is we're babying plants through August, and if you can push them through then, and you're not a big cool season gardener, sometimes you can get another flush in like September into October of tomato plants just because the temperatures came down. But taking them up helps. But I mean, that's kind of what kind of gardener you are, right? Because you either want to push them through to get that late flush, or you're going to rip them out because you like your cool season garden even more, and like, why not just do that? Yeah.
I have just a couple questions. I have ruthless written down a lot in my notes. But do you replace anything in that moment? Do you just clear that plant out, or is there a timing where you could put a new plant in, or?
It depends on where I am in the season. If it's, maybe as far as June, I would try to replace. July and August is no man's land out there, and I'd not be trying to like start anything because that's just heartbreak. Late August into September, I'd be replacing with a cool season, or at that point, for my garden personally, that's when I start throwing out clover seed because I'm like,
Okay.
whatever. But like, don't be trying to start stuff, like especially like 4th of July into August.
Okay.
It seems nice. It's about to be real hot.
And then you,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You said that there are some plants that maybe have adapted to this climate. Is there anything that?
Oh, not of these. No. I'm saying like our native perennials have. But
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
even like when we think about what are our native fruits and veggies, it would
Yeah.
be blueberries. Blueberries actually like sandier soils. They tolerate our soils, but they're much happier in better drained, different soils. Like what is actually locally adapted here. Obviously, there are many foods that are locally adapted here. People have lived here a very long time. But when we think about commercially viable vegetables, like you're going to go buy a seed packet from Stone Brothers and Bird.
Yeah. Okay.
Most of it's from kind of the Peruvian region. Some of it's from Asia. It's not from here.
Okay. Thank you.
I can ask a non-tomato
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I can do other things too.
Squash beetles.
Oh, dude. Okay.
Yeah.
So I started carrying this knife specifically to carve squash vine borers out at the base of squash plants. So that's one. Squash are hard though. Squash beetles will get you. Squash vine borer will get you. Beetles, there is a different type of BT that specifically targets grubs. That can be effective. Look for it. Sometimes it's sold as like milky spore. But squash, especially if you're talking summer squash, this is a very unfortunate answer. But at the point where your summer squashes due, all of your friends are trying to give you summer squash, right? Like any of your vegetable gardener friends are like, you want a zucchini? And they're just pushing them on you. And so to some degree, I don't grow squash anymore because they're big plants. They take up a lot of space, especially in an urban garden. I find they're not space efficient. They have so many problems that can hit them disease and pest-wise. And I know a lot of people push in summer squash. So kind of backed off from it because it's just a heartbreaker for me sometimes. It's doable, but it's a heartbreaker. I'm going to take 2 more.
My sister wanted me to ask, she heard of banana water and coffee grounds.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Now I'm a beginner, so.
No, I love that. So I want to say that, like, as an extension agent, I come from a research-based perspective. That's the space I inhabit, right? And from a research perspective, I think there are other things that are more effective. Some of these other fertilizers we know more about and that we've done the research on. That is not to say that those things could not be effective and that people might not have success with them. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, this is the little box I'm in,
Yeah.
just based on what I'm doing here. But I tend to stick more with kind of known organic options because I like to know exactly what's in that bag nutrient-wise. I like to be able to dial it in. And some of those things that are like more homebrew options, you just don't know exactly what level of nutrient you're getting out of them. So like, I would also say like, try it and see how you feel about it. And also maybe have a couple of plants that you go a more conventional route on and just see how you feel about those two experiences. Yeah.
Do you recommend a clover species?
Yeah, so around here we use crimson clover. I always forget if it's crimson clover or red clover. Molly?
Crimson clover.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I buy crimson clover. You can buy it in bulk from some of our local garden centers, which is really nice because you just go in and you're like, give me your smallest amount. And it's like $2 and it's more than you'll ever need. And I just throw it out on the beds and I really like it. The thing about it is that when you go to get rid of it in the spring, cut it down to the ground, till it in very slightly. Do not pull the roots out because the nitrogen fixing happens in the roots and the plants are not being benevolent, they're doing it for themselves. And so those roots have to die in the soil for the nitrogen to be released back out.
When do you sow it? Like, what's the timing for it?
I always sow it too late. So ideally it would be kind of late August or like September, like just before it's starting to cool down seriously. I will include a schedule for all of that in our follow-up notes. Yeah, I'm always a little late. All right, so we're gonna take another like 2-minute break, and then we're gonna come back for a